Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let's kick off day two of AusCERT2023. Hope you had a great time at the conference dinner and awards ceremony last night. If indeed you were there, let's start by acknowledging the Combermary people, traditional custodians of the land we are meeting upon today, and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. A couple of highlights today. Don't forget the counselling sessions with Dr. Carla are continuing. You can head to the registration desk and book yourself in a session there if you want to talk to her about anything that's going on in the Careers Village. Proved very popular yesterday, the cybersec people still giving careers, resume and the like help today. And the speed debate will wrap up AusCERT2023 this afternoon after your parallel streams here on the main stage. This morning we're looking at the concept of robust data governance and its relationship with cybersecurity in this increasingly interconnected world, starting with a panel discussion and then a keynote presentation. For our panel discussion this morning, you know them all. Australian security researcher and founder of the data breach notification service Have I Been Pwned? Troy Hunt will be joining us on stage. Come on up here, Troy, along with Craig Rowlands, Director of Data and Technology at Bupa, Kate Carruthers, the Chief Data and Insights Officer for UNSW Sydney and the Head of Business Intelligence for the University AI Institute, and Sasenka, Abeysooriya, Program Director and Senior Strategic Advisor for the University of Queensland, AusCERT. Give our panel a big round of applause. Up they come, and let's get this underway. We'd love to have your questions as well on the topic of data governance and cybersecurity, building a resilient future through collaborative strategies. Just hit us up on the app, select this session on the app, and you can type away questions. They'll come up to me and I'll throw them to the panel as soon as they emerge. Let's get a bit of a scene setter from all of you. I'll start with you, Troy, and work down this way. What are your current observations of data governance and cyber security in the modern workplace? We're putting the focus on data governance this morning. Give us your thoughts, Troy.
It's a good time to talk about this, isn't it, after last year? Look, I think what we're learning at the moment is that we have major issues around everything from retention to the amount of data we collect to how we use that data for things like identity verification. I think it's sort of a bit of an absurd time that we're sitting here with people with accounts they haven't used for the last 20 years have driver's license numbers which in and of themselves are sufficient to get you enough points of identity verification that it justifies changing them. So definitely major issues around retention and volumes of data.
Craig, your thoughts?
Yep, thanks, Adam. Retention is definitely one of them. When you look at the amount of access that individuals have got, it's a tricky outcome because the business is saying they want to democratize data, which means give it to as many people to be able to do their job as they can, whereas we want to make sure it's being done safely. And for part of that to happen, you have to have a literacy outcome, you have to have an education outcome because we're actually fairly weak on that. I think the other area around it is the culture is really poor. Prior to kind of Medibank and Latitude, etc., it was she'll be right, we won't get an attack. Clearly that's changed.
Kate, what do you think? Set the scene for us.
I always like to talk to people about why we do data governance. We don't do it because we love it. We do it because we need to make financial decisions about what we need to protect. So the cyber people need to know what is important and what needs the most protection, and that's a fundamental practice. So it's always important to ask why, and it's that financial risk trade-off, and it's an essential function.
Sasenka.
I think for me it's really encouraging that we're finally starting to take it serious. I think there is still an element of, data governance is a compliance thing, it's a legal thing, but I think we're also starting to see the real opportunities. We're seeing the opportunities, obviously, from an analytics point of view, but actually also becoming a bit more secure. So, whether it's actually using the data to become a little bit more secure and identifying any threats that way as well. So, I think it's encouraging.
Troy, you work at the cutting edge of data breaches. You see them all the time through the website and the like. I noticed as an outsider last year, when the first of those big high-profile data breaches happened, the sort of response was, whoops, and then the more that they went on, the more you started to hear language about, this was a highly targeted, extremely professional, brutal takedown that I don't think any organisation in the world could have stopped. What is actually happening? What is happening with the data breaches? What are your observations as to why they happen? Rachel yesterday talked about social engineering and said humans are still the big factor a large percentage of the time.
I think one of the interesting stats you hear is all the time there's something like 90% of data breaches are due to human error. I'm like, no, it's 100%. Like, there's never a data breach where you go, I don't know how this happened, like everything went just fine. Like, there's always an element of human error somewhere. If we look at, let's say, the two biggies from last year being Optus and Medibank, they were very, very fundamentally different. I mean, Optus was like literally insecure direct object references, someone changing a number in a URL. And it's fascinating to see, on the one hand, Optus defending this as highly sophisticated, et cetera. Then Claire O'Neill comes out and says, no, it was really basic. So it's nice to see honesty from the government there as well. The Medibank thing was obviously much more commercially motivated, much more sophisticated, had much greater impact as well, but very, very different risks. You know, we've heard about there being a problem there with an account takeover, which has obviously then led to huge amounts of data exfiltration. So that they're very fundamentally different problems that were both very high headline news and both due to inevitably multiple mistakes along the way.
Craig, a large organisation like Bupa, you deal with not only a large volume of data, but some of it's extremely sensitive. First of all, when you saw other large organisations that deal with very sensitive data having breaches last year, does the fear of God run through you and your organisation when you see something like that? And where's Bupa at? How's its cybersecurity practices align with data governance?
Confession time. I used to work at Medibank before I worked for Bupa. So there's the first thing.
There you go.
So I do know how it happened. And they were warned. So that's the first thing I want to say. Yes, look, it does put the fear of God into me because I'm one of a number of customers, 4.1 million customers of Bupa. And I don't want my information to be out there. I don't want my family's information to be out there. And I don't want anybody's information to be out there. So the answer is yes. I guess for us, how do we protect that and how do we make sure we're doing the right things? Well, most organisations are actually moving or attempting to move to the cloud to use a lot of the native tools that are up there, as well as augment those with third-party tools. That's security and data governance working in tandem to get those outcomes. So again, how do you make sure that your endpoints and your perimeter are safe? How do you make sure that the individuals working on Troy's point, they're actually doing the right thing and are having the right controls? We had a little chat down at the front earlier around individuals, and even if they move roles, they probably still retain the access that I had previously. Why is that happening? Right, so there's a whole number of reasonings behind the sensitive data and how you need to protect it. The endpoint perimeter is certainly one. The retention strategies and not retaining stuff longer than you should do, or even that you need to, because it's not a case of we can, it's actually should we, right? That's the important factor. You should be purging the data at that time period as well. So there's a whole ream of factors in there.
But realistically, why would a corporation purge data? Isn't data the oil? Isn't data the reason corporations are in the game in the first place? Where's the incentive for an organisation to give up any data that it's got access to?
Well, how relevant is it? I speak to modelers and they tell me that they want to be able to work on the recession and the information from recessions back to the 1930s. Completely different economic climate at that point in the GFC to now. So actually, how relevant is that data? So remember, it's if we're going to use it and we want to be a data-driven culture, what are we using it for? What's the outcome we're looking for? And is that data actually relevant today? So the example I'll have from a previous organisation, it's a store card organisation. They were wanting to use 5 years' worth of data to build store card behavioural reports out. They actually only used 24 months. So what about the rest of the 36? Just don't keep it.
I did an event recently, Kate, and we were talking about exactly these issues, and there was someone from a bank on stage, and they said, you've got to understand our position. We're legally obliged to keep some of this stuff for 7 years. You have to keep records for people's tax, etc. And there was a woman from the university on the panel, and I noticed she was giggling away when the guy said, we've got to keep this stuff for 7 years, and I said, what's your take on this? She said, there's certain data that universities are obliged to keep for 75 years. Now, unless someone wants to suddenly protest an exam result from the 1950s or something, why are universities being forced to keep hold of data for decades and decades?
Well, that's typically research data, the 75 years or even 100 years we have some obligations to keep. But we actually, for our administrative data, we're very much like any other enterprise, and we just happen to keep data for a long time because we don't have the procedures to securely delete it. And so that's something that I think every university and every business is looking at now. Do we need to keep the data? Why are we doing it? And, you know, so I signed up at UNSW as a student recently, and I was really confronted because I asked for a scan of my passport, and I was like, I wonder where that's being stored. So I went and did some digging, and, you know, we've got data that we need to make sure that we protect. Now, we've been doing a lot of work. We got hacked back in the day. So we got hacked in 2012 before it was cool.
So huge trendsetters, you.
It was on the front page of the paper, but nobody cared about it back in those days. So we've been hardening our defences ever since then. So we're really lucky. And hilariously, ANU got hacked a couple of years ago, and they got hacked the same way we got hacked, through their domain controllers. So, you know, it's hilarious that really fundamental practices hadn't sunk in even a couple of years ago. And I think we're all really conscious now with all these recent data breaches. Like, I'm in all of them. I might as well just publish my passport on my website. Everybody's got it now. So we need to protect that, and we need to start pushing back on these government regulations. So I think industry, in particular banking and finance, should start pushing back, because there is no good reason for them to keep things like identity data. And I think everybody in the state and federal governments is starting to work out, to want to work out how we can do identification, you know, just storing hashes that it's a valid identity, not storing the actual scan of a passport or something. I think that's the thing that we need to move towards.
Well, question here, Sasenka. I mean, you don't have to sell in this room the importance of data governance, I'm sure, but you work in the space. You helped establish an industry-leading data governance capability at UQ. Across the industry, do people take data governance anywhere near as seriously as cyber security? Do they understand the importance? Is it anywhere on the agenda compared to where it needs to be?
I mean, it's getting better. Is probably my response. I think we need to acknowledge that data governance is just not as sexy, right? Cybersecurity is sexy, and what are the outcomes of data that are sexy? A cool dashboard, that's what everyone wants. I probably shouldn't name him, but the boss, Dr. Stockdale, I think he called dashboards crack for idiots or something. I think that's the ultimate outcome, right? I think it's also a literacy thing. So people not actually understanding the benefits and the risks that that we have with data. So that's why cybersecurity is just a little bit more accepted in the industry. We know we need to do it, and we're starting to see that a little bit more with data and data governance. But to me, honestly, a data literacy, awareness, those are probably two of the biggest gaps that we have in the industry. Not just for universities, I would say for industries.
We've got some great audience questions coming through. I'll give a couple of these. Anyone on the panel who wants them. Paul M asks, do you think the answer is greater accountability for senior management and decision makers? Is there a balance to be struck between the benefits that accrue versus the risk for customers? Greater accountability for senior management? Anyone on the panel want to have a say?
I'll grab that one. So senior managers are typically accountable, but they often are the decision makers when they don't understand the problem domain. So you've got people who are accepting risk when they don't understand the consequences of accepting that risk. So a person in the business is making a call on a highly technical security or data governance matter when they're not skilled to do it. So what we need to be able to do is better support them and to have better automated decisioning. So, you know, now that we've got AI and stuff that can automatically classify data and put it in the correct, properly secured spot, we should do that rather than leave it up to human beings, because, as Troy pointed out, human beings are the weakest link.
This might be one for you, Troy. James says, as an organisation with over 180,000 users, we saw a massive increase in social engineering attempts against our service desk with the leaked Medibank and Optus data. That sort of spillover, that sort of spill-on effect. And James asks, how do you see ID verification changing in this space as well?
Well, I think, first of all, it's fascinating the way we do identity verification at the moment. It's a combination of relying on numbers printed on a piece of plastic that we regularly hand over at a bar or something to get a drink. And then depending on your state, you might need two numbers, the one on the front and then the one on the back as well. which is kind of crazy in this day and age, and then dependent on things like static knowledge-based authentication. You know, what's your date of birth, just so we know you are who you say you are. And we've still got this sort of like legacy hangover, and meanwhile we're all walking around with like cryptographic supercomputers in our pockets and on our wrists, and we have all of these other ways of verifying identity to a much higher degree of confidence than what we've ever had before. So I think we've really got to move away from the sorts of information that is so continuously exposed, either accidentally by data breaches, or literally because you're handing things over or putting it on your social media profile, dates of birth, which you should be able to do, by the way. It's crazy we're in this situation. It's like, don't put your birthday on social just in case like you get your identity stolen. It's like, I want to have parties and cakes and things. So we do have better ways, but we've just got to move the industry through into the future.
Craig?
I completely agree with Troy. In fact, some countries and some organisations are actually doing it. So in South Africa, if you want to open up a deposit account, you just have a photograph taken, and that photograph is taken back to the ministry, and it confirms that it's actually a viable picture of you. Away you go to open up a deposit account. It's the same thing in the Middle East for opening up accounts as well in there. And in fact, in the UK, when they were looking at it for HSBC, about 7 years ago, they had two identical twins. Clearly not quite as identical, because at the time, the twin could actually get into the bank account of the first one. These days they can't, because, you know, like many individuals, you've got slightly different things. So the positioning of your nose, as an example, compared to your twin, or actually one ear slightly higher than the other, allows that differentiation to occur. So Troy's completely right.
When it comes to overseas, Sasenka, there's a question here from Luke. Would a GDPR or a CCPA type legislation improve data governance and data protection in Australia? Why are we so far behind the US and EU? Now, obviously, you don't need to tell me what a GDPR or a CCPA type legislation is, but hypothetically, if I had no fucking idea what that meant, what does it mean?
Well, if we make that assumption that you know that what it means, I think I think the answer is yes. But I also think that our Australian laws are actually not too dissimilar. I think they're very similar. If we were to look at GDPR, I think the major difference is the right to forget clause that's in it. So of course, you know, and I think, you know, the Australian government is looking at improving and trying to introduce some of these things. We've got the notifiable breach scheme as well. So absolutely we'll improve it. But I think my answer is it's actually quite similar.
Kate, Craig was talking about the enhanced visual recognition in the case of the twins. Artificial intelligence, obviously big in this space, machine learning and the like. Does it have a role? Can it be leveraged to improve data governance and cybersecurity practices within organisations?
It is already being used to do that. So we're currently implementing a new records management solution that uses AI to automatically classify things. So organisations are already leveraging AI to improve their data governance. And it's the kind of thing that I was talking about before, automate it so that people don't have to do anything. People are really, really bad at tagging stuff. There is this tiny, tiny proportion of the world who will tag stuff. I'm one of them. The rest of you won't. No one else will. So, you know, we just have to take the people out of the loop and use AI. And AI is big now. ChatGPT's changed everything. So ordinary people now have an idea of what AI can do, and it'll take over now, so it'll be really fast.
We've had two questions come in at almost exactly the same time about cloud. Mahesh asks, do you see any trends changing with data governance as we move towards hybrid cloud? And Andrew asks, as more organisations move infrastructure to cloud and continue to integrate and share more data with third parties, what would your top recommendations be to stay safe and secure and not become the next target? So what are the implications of moving to cloud? And what are some good strategies for people who are moving to cloud to adopt? Who wants to have a swing at those? All yours, Craig.
I'll take the first one. So moving to the cloud, and Bupa are very much on the cloud. No secret that we're on Azure. But you can have different security postures. So for instance, we look after the Australian Defence Force. And to do so, we must be IRAP certified. So there are different security classifications depending on the data that you've got up there, first thing. The second thing is you can put logical partitions in there to split your data. So for us, for health insurance and health services data, there is a logical wall between the two of them. So therefore, from a data sharing perspective, you've got a very different outcome in terms of what you would allow people to see and what you wouldn't allow people to see. So cloud adoption, definitely with the native tools that you've got, and even the third-party tools allows you to do that. And even the sharing with third parties, you can still put them into a secure area, review that secure area, and then determine what you want to do. The last thing I'll say about the cloud is it allows you to stand up facilities very quickly and blow them away, right? Whereas in a local data center, that's very difficult to do so. In fact, I think we heard from Cloudflare yesterday saying how difficult it was to actually decommission.
Troy, is there any blanket rule that on-premise cloud or hybrid cloud or fully off-premise cloud are inherently more secure than the other, or is it purely a matter of the way those individual systems have security built in? Because I work with a lot of different organisations that promote their fully off-premise cloud as, by definition, the most secure. Are any systems inherently more secure, or does it matter on the specific system and the way it's equipped and designed?
I think it's fascinating we're still having the same discussion 15 years later, because it feels like we've been doing the same thing since the, early teens or something. I think that what we've got to recognise is that these are different security postures. It's not that one is inherently more secure or less secure than the other. There's a lot of, I think, FUD around this in terms of, well, if it's on-prem, for example, it's fine. So, well, it's still all remotely accessible. Or if it's onshore, it's fine. Well, okay, but you've got someone managing it offshore. Like, at the end of the day, it's just computers that are accessible. I would add to Craig's point before, I think what a lot of the value of cloud is that you get access to security paradigms that were very hard, even for large organisations, to implement independently. Think about things like hardware security modules. They used to be very, very expensive devices that you'd have to put in and have dedicated people to maintain, and now it's like a service that you just turn on. As I mentioned at Cloudflare before, look at all the stuff you get out of the box, even for free from Cloudflare, before you start to spend just little bits of money that would have been extraordinarily expensive before. So you can absolutely use cloud to become a lot more secure. You can also do things faster and cheaper and screw them up easier than ever before. Gives you both options.
Good to know. Ray asks, here we go, I like Ray's question. It's been suggested that society should come to the acceptance that there is no personal versus private data, and then this would make data less valuable by definition. Is Ray onto something here, or has Ray been up on the wacky tobacco?
Yeah, just get Ray's date of birth and his mother's maiden name, and see how he feels about that.
Okay.
Well, we should just think about that for a moment, because in the old days we used to just put data in a database and it would just sit there and it was very static. This whole analogy of oil's crazy, but data was static. And now what data does is it drives important business processes so it flows. And increasingly now, if you want to participate in the modern economy, you've got to have your data in a place where it can flow so that you can receive services, you can deliver services. And that's the essential change in the nature of data. And that's why data governance at scale and automation is so important. And it's also why cybersecurity is so important, because we don't want people to be able to know how much money we've got, where it is, So there's things that we want to keep secret. There are things that we don't want to publish publicly. And we should be in control of that as human beings and as individuals.
Anthony suggests perhaps it's time we move to user-controlled identity where users can revoke access. There's lots of good Web3 technologies in the pipeline for this. Anyone familiar with those technologies, and do they have potential?
I think this comes back to the whole, it's like the cookie consent thing. Who just clicks yes on every cookie? I do. I actually just installed an extension that says no to them all for me. But people don't want to do that. People do not want to be in charge of their data. They want someone else to be in charge of it. And the whole cookie fiasco was really good evidence that, yeah, in principle, they want to say what they want to do with it. But when it's on every website in the world, you get very quickly over it.
Sasenka, as you work in this field across a range of industries, are there any blanket statements that some industries are doing this better than others and some are particularly fast and loose when it comes to data governance?
I mean, I think it all starts with, for a lot of organizations, data governance is sort of done at the business intelligence level, at the reporting level. And I think it's good, and it's a good start. I think you're definitely seeing more of a trend of it moving into, at least what I've observed, into the IT sphere, where there's data integration. That's where you maintain your databases. That's where your analytics happen. And I know that's probably slightly different UNSW as well, but yeah, no, I think it is a blanket statement. It's a bit difficult, but I think again, I'm just that positive, optimistic guy. I can really see a positive move into, working closer with cybersecurity. Actually, looking at I know. So, question earlier around data classification as well. It's really looking at, okay, what is the data that we're looking at? What data do we have? What data do we store? And actually then using that to inform what your cybersecurity practices are. And that's probably the trend that I'm seeing more now, which is very encouraging.
We've had a couple of questions come in about classification. Paul asks, are people really bad at classification? Or are we just lazy because the consequences are someone else's problem? And who is responsible when AI misclassifies? And Peter asks a similar question. What happens when AI gets classification and tagging wrong, and there's a breach of that data because there are lesser controls in place? Who's at fault in that case? Craig?
I've got a question for the audience. How many of you have got a data classification document and are you aware of it? Please put your hands up.
I'll give you half the room on that.
Okay, there's a good start already, right? So already from a literacy and education point of view, 50% of the individuals in this room are not aware of what their data classification is and what a document is and what they should and shouldn't be classifying data as. So if you take that out exponentially to all the organisations, and it's probably about the same outcome as this, there's an issue in itself, first of all. So the literacy isn't there, the culture isn't there, first and foremost, and then the education isn't there to be able to do it. The tools can do all of these things. There's no issue with the tools doing them. It's actually the culture from the top, the education, the literacy that provides the outcome you're looking for.
Kate, is there an issue with AI potentially, and then to use the Sasenka, potentially getting classification wrong?
Well, there's always an issue with potentially getting classification wrong, and this is where your cyber defences need to be in place. Like for us, we have a default position that everything should be encrypted before we classify it, so that's a protection. And so organisations need to start to think about things like that, and then the misclassification of things doesn't matter quite so much.
I think it's also interesting that a lot of the data classification is still done manually, and it's done by the wrong people. We talked about accountability before as well. It's kind of insane that IT people in a lot of organizations are classifying data on behalf of finance or HR. They're not the subject matter experts for those data sets or the data domains. So it's, first of all, everyone is, I'm sure, aware of their, various data governance roles, like data custodians and owners, whatever you call them. But very often you'll see that they're actually assigned to the completely wrong people in the organization. Finance people should be classifying the finance data. They are the subject matter experts. They know the risk to that data set, and I think that's probably one of the other major risks.
Colby asks, there are so many laws protecting personal data, but are there sufficient regulations protecting other forms of sensitive data, like company data? If you want it, Craig, all yours.
I'll take it. Yes, there are, is a simple matter. So we have APRA regulations. So we were talking earlier about the university having to store things for 75 years. Companies have to retain board meeting records forever. So you can imagine how far they go back. So there are legislation to ensure that you should be protecting company data as well. And when we talk about sensitive data, it isn't just personal information. It is, for somebody like Bupa, sensitive financial information, sensitive commercial information as well. So yes, the simple answer is.
David asks, should we pay the Russians a subscription to whitelist us?
No.
Anyone on the panel feel we should?
No.
That's unanimous. Good question, David. Troy, the Internet of Things, multiple more, you hear it up into the tens of billions perhaps, devices integrated into our daily lives in the next decade. How can organisations make sure that robust data governance and cybersecurity measures are implemented to protect just the vast volumes of data that those devices will be collecting?
Oh man, that's such a mess. I mean, like everything now is getting a connection because there's some sort of point of difference or value proposition. Like a washing machine is connected. I'm still not entirely sure why, but it seemed like a cool idea at the time.
I bought a toothbrush the other day, and when my wife and I have got a couple, and there's the occasional. They've all got these Oral-B toothbrushes that look exactly the same, and some of them put a little, rubber band around, and there's just fights. So I thought I'd buy a completely different one. So I grabbed the Colgate toothbrush, and top of the range. And I didn't realise two things. One, it's not a normal bloody PowerPoint; it's a USB charger, so I have to charge it out in the kitchen, not in the bathroom. And two, it's Wi-Fi connected. It's got an app, so I don't know what. I can't imagine a situation where I'm out thinking I've really got to do X with the toothbrush. Damn it, it's at home. That's all right. I'll go on the app. I don't understand why my toothbrush is connected to Wi-Fi. Keep going with your answer.
And then one day your toothbrush data is going to be in Have I Been Pwned? Like, imagine that future. Look, I think with IoT, the best course of action at the moment is we decide what is it that we actually need to connect. You can use the toothbrush and not connect it. That's up to you to make that decision. But particularly as organisations, and I know it's becoming a bit of a buzzword, but this whole sort of concept of zero trust around expecting everything on the network to be potentially malicious. So certainly that idea of isolating things from each other is solid. I think the bit that's a lot trickier is what about the data collection of these items? Because at the end of the day, IoT, not IoT, a lot of the time the data just goes up into the cloud, it's sitting there in another database. There are a bunch of data breaches in Have I Been Pwned from things like connected teddy bears. It's like if you connect your teddy bear, you might end up having your data exposed in an open MongoDB with no password. And then you're in Have I Been Pwned because you wanted to talk to your teddy bear. So look, the isolation and the zero trust stuff is one thing, that's obviously good practice, but the other bit around data collection and retention is enormously difficult to establish with IoT.
Craig, what are the most common challenges organisations face when they do take on this challenge and try and integrate data governance and cybersecurity strategies and get them working together? I might get some thoughts from you as well, Sasenka.
I mentioned culture first and foremost, and that comes from the top down. I think Sasenka made a small quip to say security is more sexy than data governance. Yes, it is, but they're also probably in the bottom 5 compared to everything else in an organisation. So most people see security and data governance as something that's a nuisance factor that needs to be done. There's no return on investment. So if you're looking at the marketing campaign will always be number 1 over and above these outcomes. Medibank's example was David Koska, the CEO, when he did the annual report, had actually said, it cost us $46 million in revenue. We're not even counting the class action and regulatory fines, etc. For something that probably would have cost them about $2 million to resolve. Right? So there's the first thing around the culture. Again, we go back to literacy and education that's stopping the individuals as well. We did talk earlier a little bit on some of the other sort of roundtables I was on around the individuals and the capabilities that we've got in market in Australia. I think there's a little bit of that needs happening. When I did a search for data stewards at a previous organisation, the job title for data steward came up 95 times in the whole of Australia. Only 95 times. That's not enough. So there's another example.
Sasenka, is one of the positives out of that very rough year we had last year that if people want to try and get this on the agenda at their organisation now, it's probably a bit easier than it was 18 months ago? Because I repeatedly, when I do panels, I'm hearing that some of these organisations were warned or really should have seen the potential for some of these things happening. Maybe people had tried to prosecute the case at some of these large organisations and they got nowhere. Is there more of is now the time to strike in this area, Sasenka?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, one of the, critical things you need to really deliver a good data governance practice in your organization is that executive buy-in. The executives have finally woken up. They got the warnings. So let's leverage that. I think you need to start from the top. They're the ones who will, they'll be the champion. But also try and really understand your stakeholders, right? So what do they care about? Is it just cybersecurity? Or are they frustrated with the reports that they're getting, they're making decisions on? Is it, is compliance something that's keeping them up at night? There's so many reasons why they would be interested. And cybersecurity is just one of them. So absolutely, now is the time.
Kate, where are universities at in general in this space as an industry, particularly good, bad, middle of the road, depends from university to university?
It really does depend from university to university. So, the big research universities like UNSW, UQ, University of Melbourne, Sydney, we have more resources to throw at this, and thanks Optus, thanks Medibank, thanks Latitude, we're finally getting some budget. And we also have bigger teams that we can throw at this, so it's really variable. But I will say it really does take a village. So, you can't just have the data governance team having this conversation. It's got to be cyber, information security, data governance, privacy, and your records and archives. And you need to loop procurement in, because you need to actually start to address all your third-party risk in the contracting process. And you also need to have cyber reviews of all your software as a service, which we're all increasingly buying. So, you need to understand the entire life cycle of your risks that you face and bring all of those people together to work collaboratively. And that you can do for free if you've got those people in your organisation.
A couple more quick audience questions, then I'll get one big takeaway from all of you you'd like people to implement in this space right now to improve where the needle is at. William says, we've had government-endorsed digital identities for years, enabling businesses to completely remove stored, sensitive PII. Why is no one implementing this?
Can we do like an audience poll? Who would like to give more information to the government so that you don't need to give it to other companies? I can see like one guy. What do you reckon? Like single-digit percentage. And this is kind of the uncomfortable space, right? Where one of the ways we can address this problem is to have more centralised identity authorities. But it does mean having to give more information over to a centralised authority. And then the concern is, well, how much information do they then have about us? And people get very, very, I guess, jaded about the way the government's handled our data in the past. So that's the uncomfortable reality. I don't think people really want to hand over
But Troy,
that much
they've
information.
already got all of our data.
Yeah, they
The
do.
government knows everything about me. It knows about you too.
And this is sort of part of the ironic thing. I mean, I was on a panel the other day and someone's like, I don't want digital driver's licenses because we have to give the government more data. And so they have it already. It's just a question whether they print it on a card or in a wallet. But there's a perception that centralising through government gives them more access and more visibility into your private lives outside of just government. They would see, for example, that you're a Bupa customer who is authenticated there. Now, maybe that's not a good example because I think you've got to put that on your tax return or something anyway. But there's all these other sorts of places we do provide personal information to that we could supplement with government identities, but then 1% of the audience put their hands up.
Matthew asks, as an individual, has anyone on the panel ever made contact with an Australian business and asked them to delete their data? If so, how was the experience? I see you nodding, Craig.
I did. So when I was at Medibank, they have an app called Live Better, which is a health and wellbeing app. And I wanted them to remove that data. There's a couple of reasons behind it. Obviously, I didn't want fairly sensitive information about sleep patterns, blood pressure, all of those kind of things. But the second thing is I wanted to test the backup solution. Now, the reason behind that is they can take the information out, and if they're lazy, they'll only take it out of production. They won't take it out of a backup. So if they have an outage in production and they use a backup, your data goes back into where it was in the first place. Right? So it was a twofold. It was a small experiment of my kind, and obviously to take the information out. Turns out it was a lazy first pass, and then I had to stamp my feet a little bit based on the role I'm in to be able to get them to do it properly.
Great. Someone else asked on the questions, has Adam's toothbrush started talking to Bupa yet? I'll get you to check that up for me. Let's go down the panel.
Oh, give me a minute and I'll find out.
Yeah. Let's go down the panel. Start with you, Sasenka. We'll finish with Troy. One big, and we're preaching to the converted a little bit here, but what is one key takeaway people could aggressively do to move the needle on this? Sasenka?
I think it's a little bit similar to cybersecurity as well, right? So there is a bit of a talent shortage. So start really investing in stuff that have a bit of an interest in this space. A super good example in our team at UQ, we had a veterinarian who who came into the space and just really understood data ethics really well, because there were some similar skill sets there. We had a journalist who was just extremely good in increasing more of that awareness and literacy and writing more about it. So it's really looking at your current talent pool and looking at what skills we can utilize to promote data governance.
Kate?
If you're not already having a dialogue between your data governance, your cyber, your information security, your privacy teams, start it. The more you talk, the more you realise you've got the common problems and you can help each other solve them.
Craig?
I'm going to go very high level. Get somebody with data governance and cyber experience on your board, because that's the only way that you'll actually make the change with the individuals at the very top who will actually make sure that's going to happen.
Nice work. Troy, one takeaway.
Maybe an easy practical thing. I think for those of you designing systems, new systems, building in data minimisation and privacy from the outset, it's very hard for an organisation that's as large and as incumbent as someone like Optus or Medibank to go back and start purging out the information they don't need anymore, particularly when storage is so cheap and writing code is comparatively expensive. But if you do that from day one, from the outset, I think that's going to put you in good stead for the future.
Wonderful, wonderful panel. Thank you so much to audience for these tremendous questions that have just come absolutely streaming in. As they make their way off and grab their Monopoly sets, give them a big round of applause, our panel today. Thank you so much, Troy, Craig, Kate and Sasenka.
Thank you.